Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Amazing. So perhaps you could start by talking to us a bit about, like what type of environment you grew up in and then how that led you to the military.
I grew up in Portsmouth, which is my hometown. My father was a soldier before me. So I think that was always kind of something I looked up to. And if I'm always reminded that my only toys as a child was Action Man and toy soldiers. So I guess it was in my system. And then, I joined the Reserve Army first, and then I realized I was enjoying being a soldier more than I was being a mechanic. So I made the switch, and it was one of those things that it just fitted me perfectly. So I spent my full career in the Army before you get to the stage where you're kind of forcefully retired, which is just for most of us a horrible moment. So.
When you were in the Army, you then went on to become a sniper, which is certainly a revered position and one of the hardest accomplishments. What was it in you that attracted you to that path?
I think partly what you just said there is it's considered to be sort of the best of the best. And I've always been very competitive. And there's an element of you're your own boss. You're out on your own. You're out all with one other person. So if you succeed, it's down to you. If you fail, it's down to you. So that kind of very much appealed to me. And I found sniping was just something that suited me. It's an uncomfortable career. Movie makes it look very glamorous. It really isn't. But it is kind of the epitome and the height of soldiering. So I think that's really what drove me on, is wanted to be the best.
When you were going through difficult moments in your training or as a sniper, what allowed you to dig deep and carry on?
At the time, I would have probably given you a different answer. But looking back on it now, I can tell you it was really two things. One was there was no way I was going to fail. And the other one was my faith, my belief in the fact that I could do it, and you could keep pushing through and you believe in something. And I really wanted it. It's almost like, that kid that wants that toy at Christmas and nothing's going to stop you getting it. There was a desire for me to actually pass it, and I just wasn't going to fail. Now, the Army, and to a certain extent my upbringing, would also point to the fact that I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to be a failure. And I didn't want to let my dad down, let somebody else down. So you just keep going. And then you learn it's all over fairly soon. You just push through it and get on with it. Pain's pain, wet and cold is wet and cold. It doesn't last forever.
That self-belief that you have, do you think that's something that's inherent, or is it something that you learned?
I think it's a combination of both. I think everybody has it. I just think it's your self-belief that leads you to either succeed or fail. I was always very sort of arrogant and cocky as a kid. Mainly because my brother used to beat me up on a regular basis, so you kind of have to be. And it was that self-belief that I can do this. This isn't as hard as I thought it was. But on various stages through my career, I watch people quit on courses where you just think, oh, there's no way I'm quitting. You can break me first, but I'm not going to quit. So I think really it comes down to self-belief.
Mm. For a lot of people, fear holds them back to whatever degree they're experiencing it. In a career like yours, you came head on with fear. How did you deal with fear?
It's a phrase that I never sort of came up with, but I learned fairly early on. Somebody said everything you want in life is just behind fear. And that was one of those phrases that just stuck with me. And I realized if I wanted to get what I wanted out of life, if I wanted to be a corporal, if I wanted to be a sergeant, if I wanted to be a Sgt Major, then I had to keep pushing because everybody else was pushing. The military is a very competitive world. You're kind of in a world full of alpha males. So everything is a battle. And I wanted to be the top of that pile. And so you just literally keep pushing. And if you want something hard enough, you'll get it, and fear just can't be a part of it. I always had the attitude of not fear of failure, fear of not getting what I wanted. So I just used that fear to make me keep going.
Okay. And then eventually you retire. You have spoken about this term PTSD and changing it for the term PTSI because it's more accurate, in your opinion. Could you please share that with us?
Yeah, I mean, it was better explained to me by a doctor when I was sort of getting through mine, was we really don't know that much about the brain. And he said to me, post-traumatic stress is no different to breaking a finger. If you want to paint a picture, it's no different. You just broke a part of your brain. And like your finger, the longer you take to treat it, harder it is to treat. And the problem is when you call it a disorder, alpha males in particular are not going to come forward and say, I've got this. Now, the military have got better at it, certainly better than when I was in. And they always said it's not going to affect your career. Yes, it is. And to be honest, it has to. Because if I'm a commander choosing one of two men to lead a mission, one of them's had traumatic stress before and the other one hasn't, I've got other men's lives to think about. So I'm going to choose the guy that hasn't because I know the other one may break. It may not. I can't take that risk. So it's going to affect your career, and it has to affect your career, to be honest. So guys are not going to come forward. You then call it a disorder, definitely not coming forward. Nobody wants to be labelled with a disorder. And disorder is, almost an inherent thing, whereas, post-traumatic stress, it's an injury. You've been through stress. It's no different to being punched in the jaw. That's traumatic and it's stressful, but it's physical pain. The other one is mental pain, and they're completely different. So I pushed for, and I'm happy to see that certain people are changing it, that it's post-traumatic stress injury, not post-traumatic stress disorder, or just call it PTS. It's just post-traumatic stress. And the other thing that I battled to do was to change it from being like a military illness to a general human illness, because even kids at school that get bullied suffer traumatic stress. Doctors, firefighters, nurses, they see it every day. So why is it just a military thing? You don't have to go to war to suffer traumatic stress. Wives that are in an abusive relationship, that's traumatic stress. So it's not a disorder. Nobody's coming forward to be labelled with a disorder. So I'm doing my best to get people to change that.
Yeah, I really like that terminology, because it's interesting how in society we'll go through different traumatizing events. It could even be like a loss of a job, a divorce, or something having to do with childbirth. And then automatically you're just expected to go back to your everyday life, go back to your job the next day. It's like, oh, you just got a divorce. Okay, but let's pretend nothing happened because you have a job to do. And it's not really acknowledged. And it's
Most certainly isn't.
Yeah, and it's left on the onus of the person to potentially seek out therapy, which doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone. And I think you said that even you weren't inclined to
No,
go to
it took me over a
therapist.
decade to actually realise that I didn't have all the mechanisms I needed to survive. When I first sort of was suggested I went to see a therapist, my attitude was very much, he'll care about me for an hour or until my money runs out. So it's not genuine. I'll deal with it myself. And society, certainly the army, makes you think you can. You're always told man up. And I didn't really understand the term about the English about stiff upper lip until I really learned a lot about traumatic stress. And that was just a almost Victorian way of saying man up. You never show you're broken, you never show you're damaged, just hide it, get on with it. Now in combat, on deployment, you have to be that way. You have to be able to just compartmentalise it and leave it behind. Deal with it later. The problem is there was no later. You just kept burying it. And the analogy I try and give to people is a glass, the same as these glasses of water. You can only get so much water into a glass before it overflows. That's you. That's your psyche. That's your ability to deal with things. And if you're in a sinking boat and you fill the bucket up with water, but you don't throw it over the side, you're still going to sink. Okay, you have to empty the bucket and use it again, and empty the bucket and use it again. And through my sort of suffering, I realised that crying, which men have a real problem with, is actually your body's way of emptying the bucket. Because as much as I used to fight to avoid crying because I thought it was weak, thought it made me look stupid, I realised I actually felt much better after I'd cried, and I felt stronger. I felt I could take more on, and I realised that instead of trying to avoid it, cry. Whenever you feel that welling up and you feel like you need to cry, cry. If you want to go and do it in private, go do it in private. Get it out of your system. Because if not, you're just pushing it deeper and deeper down, and eventually it's going to blow. So I was laughing with some of the guys about it and said, if somebody calls you weak because you're crying, beat them up. And go, I'm not weak, I'm just crying. And I think life in particular has stigmatized that for men. Can't cry, can't show weakness. To me, there's a difference between showing a weakness and crying. So crying's just an everyday mechanism that life, God, whatever you want to call it, has given us so that we can get to tomorrow.
When you were suffering from PTSI, you said that you didn't really feel that you were, and that it was actually those around you who helped raise the awareness of it. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Definitely. And I really did think that I was in complete control and that I had all the mechanisms I needed to deal with it. And, you know, I had a plan to end my life. So I knew that I had to con everybody else that I was back to being Mark and I was back to being normal. So in my head, I was painting a picture of me being normal and everything was great. Now, with hindsight, looking back on it, I was anything but normal. And where friends were trying to sort of tell me, you do need help, I started pushing people away. You know, I'd start fights, I was rude, I would ignore people. And people that were actually trying to help me, it's pretty mean to, because they were messing with my plan. And at the time, I had no concept at all that I really wasn't normal and I really wasn't doing the right things. And it comes back to, you know, the fact that it is a darkness. You just end up in this isolated place deep inside your head where you see an almost alternative reality to what everybody else sees. And it's a difficult place to be. And until you realize that you don't have all the mechanisms you need, you just go deeper and deeper into the dark until you get to a stage where there is an acceptance that it is me. And then you can't find a way out of the dark and you start to believe you have to go. You're the problem. Everybody else will be better off without you. And that's really where, for me, actually admitting that, you know, as a retired soldier, as a retired sniper, I needed help. And that was a very difficult moment for me. But when I made that decision, you suddenly realize that, you know, you're not weak. You're not weak to speak to a therapist. Actually, therapists are really good because they're trained to draw things out of you. And I remember the very first time that I went to a therapist and she asked me, what is the very first memory you have as a child? And I remember thinking, why am I answering this question? This is irrelevant to what I want to do. And I was pretty, you know, resistant to it at first. And she kept persisting and she asked me, first memory. I found myself crying my eyes out and I just couldn't stop because I remembered the first thing I remembered was actually my dad kicking me up the butt when I was little. And it was just a joke, but I remember how much it hurt me because my dad was my hero. And I just ended up sobbing my heart out for about 10 minutes. And that really surprised me because I'd buried that for my entire life and she triggered it. But she was smart enough to know there was something there. And over the next few sort of sessions, she pulled more and more out of me and showed me that I didn't get all my trauma from my time in the army. I got it from my life. But growing up as a kid in Portsmouth in a council house where you had to be tough, I just buried every single day. And I got to a point where later on in life, obviously, that I was full up. I couldn't take anymore. And it came out. And I would have never have believed that there was so much trauma wrapped up inside me because I never felt it. Or at least maybe I did, I just didn't recognize what the triggers were or didn't recognize what that feeling was that I was feeling. I wasn't crying because I'm manly. And I'd start fights. You know, certainly me and a friend of mine were both suffering at the same time. We would start physical fights in bars. And it wasn't until I wrote the book that I realized what I was doing was I was transferring something to an area that I could deal with. I couldn't deal with mental pain because I didn't know how to stop it. But I could deal with physical pain. I've done that all my life. So if I get into a fist fight with somebody in a bar, even if I end up losing and I just get a good kicking, I know the physical pain is going to leave. But all the time that I'm physically in pain, mental pain stopped. And obviously, when you realise that, you start to think, well, there's got to be an alternative to punching somebody in the mouth in a bar. And to be honest, for me, it turned out to be, meditation and actually talking to people about it. And that actually put me in a much calmer place and allowed me to cope with it from day to day.
It's so interesting because there are so many things at play here. You know, the British culture is so well known for not expressing emotion.
Oh, we're extremely
openly.
deadpan.
Yeah. And then being a sniper where everyone's looking at you to be strong, you know, taking off that armor must be, you know, extremely.
Writing the book is probably the most scary thing I've ever done. And I've explained to people before, to me, it's a book of my mistakes. So it was a very difficult thing to write. And I also wanted to reach a lot wider audience than soldiers, because I was trying to make a point that it's not a soldier's injury. So I tried to find things that were outside of my military career. And I suddenly realised there were things from my early childhood all the way through to my life now that have caused me pain and have added to that. And I buried all of them. You know, you just keep burying them because you can't admit it. You can't show any sort of a weakness, certainly as a soldier. And if you're a leader in the army as well, you definitely can't show weakness, because my men have to believe in me to get up from behind that rock that's protecting them and follow me up a hill where there's a good chance they're going to get shot. If they doubt me, they're not getting up. They have to believe in me 100%. So you end up believing in you at the same time. Your self-belief becomes even stronger, which means your ability to say, I may need help, becomes harder and harder. And that's why, 22 veterans a day killing themselves is just unacceptable. You know, both the UK and the US have now lost more men to suicide than they lost in combat. There's something seriously wrong with that. And the biggest problem is governments around the world say it's a military injury. So there's no research, there's no funding. It's a human injury. And I say that as bad as 22 a day is, at least somebody's counting. How many doctors are committing suicide? How many nurses are committing suicide? How many young kids are committing suicide? At least somebody's counting soldiers. So it's a much bigger problem than I think anyone wants to admit.
So as you've alluded to, you're a best-selling author. And in your book, Outdance the Devil, you describe a very difficult time when you came face to face with suicide in your own life.
I did.
Yeah.
I lost my wife to suicide. And basically, there were so many lessons for me in that, both before and afterwards. Like, I never spotted the pain that she was in. She was a former police officer, extremely tough woman. She had a great sense of humour, and nothing seemed to bother her. So the fact that she would actually take her own life just never entered my head. And she did. She was bullied for just over a year at work. And when you listen to the sort of bullying that she went through, and I know that because I've seen the emails that were being sent and stuff like that, you would have thought that would have just rolled off her back. But I guess after a year, it just becomes too much. And she tried to hide in a combination of Ambien and vodka. And she knew I didn't like her taking Ambien, so she would hide it. And then she'd take herself off to bed early and everything else. On the particular evening, I was in one room, she was in the other. Heard the gunshot. I'm a soldier. I know what that sounds like. Long story short, I lost her. Now, my army career didn't really bother me. We have rules of engagement. If I point a gun at you, you've met the rules of engagement. And they're very strict. So that was outside of my military career, and it was just something I found very difficult to deal with. She was my world at the time. And literally, I found myself sitting outside my house hours after she died. Sounds pretty sort of dramatic, but the sun was coming up and I was kind of looking at the house. We'd been in the house 12 days. We'd literally just moved in. And thinking, how did my house become, or how did my home become just a house so quick? And that sort of realization that every single plan I had in life was now gone was a huge shock. And I refused therapy, didn't think I needed it. But I had a plan to follow her. And I thought, as long as I paint the picture that I'm okay, nobody's going to interfere with me. And the reason I thought I was thinking correctly was because I knew I had to get the bank sorted out, I had to get the house sorted out, and I had a whole list of things I knew I had to do so my kids were okay and everybody I knew was okay before I went that route. But I'd made the decision I was going. And I thought I was amazingly sensible and amazingly sort of covert about the whole thing. Speaking to friends, I wasn't. But I'd made that rational decision and I just got deeper and deeper into my head. Didn't care about anything. I didn't care about what I was spending because it really didn't matter. I wasn't going to be here. And you just spiral down. And there's, if it wasn't for certain things, and for me it was my dogs, that would interrupt that spiral down, I wouldn't be here. And one of the reasons, friends asked me to write the book is, with 22 a day, how did you not pull the trigger? And it made me think. So I did. I sat down and I thought about, how did I not pull the trigger? What was it that stopped me and got me from day to day? And for me, it was genuinely my dogs. My dogs seemed to know every time I was crashing. And they would appear from nowhere and land in my lap. And to my shame and detriment, there were times when I literally threw them off. Shouted at them to go away, but they just wouldn't. They just straight back up. And I have German Shepherds, so they're not small. And they were just literally spread out on my lap, so I couldn't get them off. And then I found that was enough. That interruptions of where my brain was going, where my thought process was going. And I always describe it as like you're just spiraling down. And on each bend, there's a question, is the bank sorted? Yes. Is this done? Yes. And I think if I'd got to the bottom of the spiral, I wouldn't be here now. My dogs made sure I never got there. They always interrupted me. And when they do, hope pops back in. And as soon as hope pops back in, you stop thinking about killing killing yourself, and you start thinking, maybe tomorrow will be better. So I always tell people now, don't worry about tomorrow, don't worry about, yesterday. Focus on today, every day. Just do today, get to the next today. And that's how I got through it. Sometimes more luck than judgment, because there were multiple times that I decided I was done in one day. For me, every time it's my dogs. And people that wouldn't give up on me. Friends and my daughter who moved to America to keep an eye on her dad, so to speak, who did realise that I wasn't in the right place and wouldn't take me, so no, I'm fine, as gospel, that got me to that point. But one thing I warn people about with PTSI is it's never truly gone. You just learn to manage it. Because for me, therapy taught me what my triggers are. And now I learn what they are, and I know how they feel when they start. So now I know what to do to stop them. And it can be anything from take the dogs to walk, go to the gym. For me, watch a war movie I haven't seen for a while. Something that makes me happy. Something that just entertains me for a while. And then that feeling goes away. I'm back to being calm again. But it's always going to be there. And we spoke before this. There was an incident recently where it comes back every now and again. You just have to battle through it again.
Do you think that grief is the same in that it never truly goes away, or do you process it? How did you deal with the grief you felt after losing your wife?
I think it kind of is the same, and because I lost my dad without any warning. Obviously, I lost my wife with zero warning. There are still days I end up in tears thinking about both of them. And missing them, especially if you're doing something that you used to do together, or you go to a place that you used to go to together, and you find yourself in tears. So my advice would be cry, get it out of your system. And I don't think you ever stop loving somebody or stop missing them if they were important to you. My dad told me something when I first joined the army that at the time I felt very disappointed with his answer. And I asked my dad what was the hardest thing he did in the army. And I was expecting, a firefight or, a hard march with a lot of weight or something. And he said to me, the day I buried two of my soldiers. And I remember at the time thinking, why was that difficult? And I felt a little bit disappointed at my dad's answer. One of the last things I did before I left the army was bury two of my soldiers. And I finally understood what my dad meant. Horrible. Especially as one of them used to be my driver on our Kosovo tour, 22 years old. So it's an extremely difficult thing to get by.
How do you think people can navigate grief?
Be honest with yourself mainly. Cry, get it out of your system. But if you find yourself having any thoughts whatsoever about hurting yourself, pick up a phone, go and see somebody, go to a shopping mall, go anywhere where there's human contact, and you'll find out that life actually is worth living. You'll be dead soon enough, at exactly the moment you're supposed to. So enjoy life. Bad times don't last, good times don't last, they just keep rotating. So whichever one you're in, either enjoy it or hang on because the good times are coming. But life really is worth living. You no matter how bad you think it is, someone's got it worse. And good times are going to come back.
Mm-hmm. Having come so close to suicide in your own life and potentially taking your own life, how do you think that people should not look at death as the way out?
The problem with that is you don't think you are. Depression is, and the reason I called the book How to Dance the Devil is because I think the devil and hell is in every single one of us. I'm not sure it's a physical place. I think we create it. And then hell is probably living day to day with what you created. So you have to get to the point where you start to recognize in you when you're going downhill. And that's when you start losing interest in things you normally love doing. And when I look back at Diane in particular, she was a bit of a horse whisperer, loved horses. We were down the stables every day. And then she didn't want to go anymore. And I just thought maybe she's tired. But now you look back on it, you go, there were so many red flags I should have seen, but I didn't know what I was looking for. So I never saw them. And I just thought she was in a bad mood or she was tired. But for you as self, if you're trying to self-assess yourself, and you really should, when you find yourself losing interest in things you love to do, maybe you have a problem. Maybe you're just starting to spiral down. Maybe you've just started to walk into the darkness that's the inside of your head, and you need to find something to stop that. You find yourself in tears, not good tears. I mean, I got so in touch with myself, I suppose, that every time I see somebody win on TV or something else, I'll well up because I'm really pleased for them. There's a difference between happy tears and sad tears. So if you find yourself thinking, life's crap, I'm done with this, or you're in tears, you don't really know why you're in tears, you just feel like you want the day over. If you're starting to say, I'm going to have an early night, when you wouldn't normally, ask yourself a question. Are you tired or are you depressed? Tired's great, you can get over that. But depression just keeps getting bigger until it takes over. And then you find yourself mentally locked in the dark, and you can't find a way out.
Talk to me about that, because you said that you went through depression yourself, and what you did to get yourself out of that.
Yeah, and again, it's you don't realize you're doing it. And a lot of people who get to that stage, because they haven't told anybody, and people have just thought, he's just having a bad day or something, or whatever. Or some people go, get over it, which is the worst thing you can say to somebody, because they don't know how to get over it. That's why they're asking you for help. They have no idea how to get over it. So for me, I found myself isolating myself, wasn't interested in anything I wanted to do. House was a mess because I couldn't be bothered to clean it. And then I get mad because the house was a mess. So it just perpetuates itself. And because I was so adamant that I was locking myself away from people, I thought I was doing it because I was in control. I was far from in control. I was just spiraling down, and I was walking further into the dark. And it is a case of, if you think about people that actually do end their lives, the people that tell you they're going to kill themselves very rarely do. It's the person, you must have heard it go, it's the last person I would have thought would have done that. And that's because people that are struggling and don't know how to, ask for help, don't. And they no, I'm fine. I always say, if somebody says to you they're fine, they're really not. It's that specific word, fine. No, you're not. But because they get to the stage where they think they're a pest to everybody else. And I'll give you an example of that. with soldiers in particular, when you do reach out to one of your friends, because once you leave, it's very difficult to leave the army, because you go from having a very organised, structured day and, maybe being a very powerful person in your position and leading men and nurturing men into combat to being nobody. And our sense of humour is different from the average civilian. So even our sense of humour is wrong when we come out in today's world. And they end up feeling that they don't fit in. They are a dinosaur. The army's done with them, thrown them out. They've got nothing left, and they get depressed. But for the people that reach out to their army friends who are maybe still in the army, they respond to you the only way they know how. Man up. Now, when you're depressed, all you hear is, you're weak. And then when you hang up the phone, you start thinking, even my friends think I'm weak. Civilians are telling me I'm weak. My army friends are now telling me I'm weak.
Maybe there's something wrong with me.
It's me.
Yeah.
And you shut down. You absolutely shut down and you isolate yourself. And then you keep telling yourself you're weak. And if you notice, most people that actually do commit suicide just go off somewhere quiet so that nobody could, one, they don't want anyone to see it. And two, they don't want anyone to stop them. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, I had something that stopped me every time that I didn't really see as being anything that could stop me. That was my dogs. And we spoke before. To me, I don't think it's a mistake that God is dog spelled backwards. They just are unconditionally in love with you and they just want your time. So they won't leave you alone. And dogs are very intuitive, I found. They know when you're ill. They'll cuddle up with you when you're not feeling well. They know when you're mentally not well, quicker than you do. So for a lot of people, now I totally understand the whole, mental health dog issue, where people are being given care dogs. This is probably one of the best things I've ever done. The fact that hospitals are now letting dogs come in and see patients, I think is one of the best things they've ever done. It really does help. Just some £120 fur monster that suddenly thinks cuddling you is all you need, and usually right. So a lot of it is self-awareness, and as I was very much against therapy, and I would now say to people, go. It is one of the most amazing things you can do because you learn so much about yourself. But more importantly, it's a private venue where you can vent, you can let your guard down, and you learn your triggers. The biggest thing is learn what triggers you. We've all got them in every part of life. And it might be just something that somebody eats a way that just annoys you when you're at a table. That's a trigger, not to the extent that you're going to kill them or yourself, possibly, but it's a trigger. So learn the ones that send you into a spiral. Learn the ones that push you into a very dark place. And once you get to that stage of depression, you and I kind of use it as an analogy of the book, you're lost. It's a very dark and quiet place. You don't know how to get out. If you walk into your house, you know exactly where a light switch is from muscle memory. You're in a place where you don't know where the light is, let alone where the switch is. So you stumble around in the dark. And if you don't ask for help, nobody even knows you're in there. So I try and encourage people now, make the phone call, talk to somebody, because then at least your friend can be shouting from outside the dark to lead you back. Otherwise you're lost.
I do some work with war vets, actually, and I guide meditations for them to help them. And we talk a lot about mental health, and something that we discuss, like one of the minimal efforts that you can do to change your energy and vibration is putting on music. And that's something that you said.
Oh, absolutely. I still do it now when I'm cleaning the house. I put loud music on, just loud enough so I sound like I can sing. And then me and the dogs will laugh and vacuum the house and fool around while we're doing it. And it's become a fun thing to do instead of a chore. But without doubt, I go back to music and my truck that I spoke to you about before. I'm not a religious man by any way, shape or form, but I am a very spiritual man and I do believe in God. But I don't think I need to go to a single building to chat to God. The Bible says he's omnipresent. So that means he should be everywhere right now. So for me, if I do have a church, it's my truck. One of my sort of dreams about moving to America was to have a pickup truck and a garage clicker. That was awesome. Got both. But I love driving my truck. So I do most of my talking to God while I'm driving my truck.
That's awesome. Talk to me a bit about meditation and the role that's played in your life.
Yeah, I thought that was another thing that made me weak. My daughter and my cousin Joe sort of suggested it, and I immediately brushed it off. No, I'm not doing that. And then my cousin Joe sent me like a 5-minute meditation link, and she said, just do that. She could be persuasive. So I found myself doing it, and I was actually really surprised at how good I felt afterwards. Because instead of being locked away in the dark in my head, I was locked away in a nice place in my head. It was extremely soothing. I'm a great believer now that there are certain tones that can change your vibration and put you into a better place. And it was amazingly relaxing. And it gave me the ability to dispel that anger that was, because there's always anger. You may be depressed, but you're also angry. And a lot of it is self-directed. I found I was very angry with me because I was weak. I couldn't get past it. I couldn't save my wife. And no matter how many times you analyse that and say, it really wasn't my fault. Medically, I did everything I could do. She wasn't breathing when I found her. I got her breathing again. I knew where the entry point was because I could see it. And I knew from my army training just kicks in. And the reason the army train you over and over and over again is that even when you're not really mentally where you should be, you still perform. I thought that I was amazingly calm that night. And it wasn't until I read the transcript of the whole evening that the 911 operator put down, she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman that she was talking to because he was so hysterical. I have no recollection of being hysterical, but I was. But my brain was still functioning calmly to a medical situation. So, like breathing, bleeding, breaks, burns. So I immediately looked, she's not breathing. There's no point in stopping the bleeding unless I can get her to breathe again. So I basically hooked a lot of stuff I found in her throat out of her throat, and she took a huge breath in, which is hope. Hope immediately rushed back into me that it was going to be okay. Now I could focus on bleeding. I knew where the wound was. It was under her chin. I could see it. So I assumed that she would have been pointed backwards. So I checked the back of her head for an exit wound. Couldn't find it. And I remember at that stage, there was a little bit of panic because I couldn't find it. And then I thought, well, if I elevate her, I'll slow the bleeding down. So I sat on the floor and I pulled her up against me. So her back was against me, her head was on my shoulder. And I basically held my shirt underneath her chin and just kept talking to her. And now that was the longest 12 minutes of my life because it took the paramedics 12 minutes to get there. And I bemoaned that for at least 2 years afterwards. And then one day I was moaning about it, and this is going to sound funny, but while I was sort of complaining about it, I just heard a voice in my head that said it was a gift. To the point that I stopped the conversation, and I was talking to her, "You all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then I thought about that for the next couple of days, thinking, how was that a gift? And then the only way I could describe it is I felt like somebody just lifted the curtains up in a theatre. And I realised the answer was, who gets 12 minutes to tell someone they love everything they should have told them already?
I mean, that's just...
It was a gift.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it.
And it made me look at it completely different.
Yeah.
Because the paramedic who was there that night came to see me 2 days later. And he said to me, if she'd survived, she'd never have been the Diane you knew because of the injury, because it was probably better this way. But she fought. I mean, when she started breathing again and I was talking to her, several times she lifted each foot up individually and placed it on the floor. And then once she'd got them both there, she just pushed with both legs, trying to stand up, to the point that I had to ask her to stop. And then I heard the paramedics asking her to stop. And he said she shouldn't have even known who she was at that stage. He goes, never seen it. Because so if there's any cancellation, she didn't mean to do that. And they found out afterwards actually it was an accident. She had Ambien and vodka in her system. She was looking in the mirror by our bed, and they said it was what they call a one of these days moments, that she put the gun under her chin and looked in the mirror and said, one of these days I'm going to do this. But where she was unbalanced, she got that distance wrong. And it was a Glock pistol, so there's no safety on it except on the trigger. And because there was a perfect Glock bruise there, they said she'd literally hit herself under the chin with it. And as the gun stopped, her hand didn't, and her hand squeezed. So they said, don't know whether it makes you feel better or not, but it was a mistake. You know, she clearly had suicidal thoughts, but they don't believe she meant to do it. And I couldn't work out if I was angry at her or not at that stage. And I think there was certainly a period where I was very angry at her. I didn't think I was. And for years I told people I wasn't. I was. I can give you an example of how I know I was now. There was a bar in America called the Tilted Kilt, where all the waitresses are dressed as schoolgirls. I had a business meeting there once because the clients wanted to go there, and Diane ripped me up for it. Why were you in there? And I was like, the clients wanted to go, and there's nothing I could do about it. So I remember driving past about 3 days after she'd passed and seeing it, and out loud said basically, F you, you left me, I'm going in there. Mm-hmm. And I went in there and got drunk. Mm-hmm. But that's when I realised I was angry at her.
Yeah.
But you just get past it. Mm. You've got to get past it or you hurt yourself.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like you've done a tremendous job of, taking all of your difficult experiences and finding gratitude in difficulty. And, you've essentially dedicated your life and to helping people. Talk to us a bit about that mission.
Well, when I left, I'd spent an entire lifetime learning a career. So I didn't see any point in just giving it up. And that's how I ended up moving to America, because there's a lot more sort of civilian jobs for a sniper than there is in the UK. So I found myself starting a new career where I was passing on all my experience to military and police officers who were still doing that job. A lot of stuff I've learned is not in books. So why should they die? Why should they spend 20 years learning what I already know? And in particular, all the stuff we learned of counterterrorism here with the IRA is now just becoming useful in America with domestic terrorism. So the world's full of circles. And then when I wrote the book, I realised I do have a lot of experience. I have managed to get past it. And I hate suicide in general, but I hate the 22 veterans feel that they have to take their lives. I hate the system's not there to support them. But I also found out that I really didn't like the fact that there's a lot of people committing suicide that nobody's paying any attention to. And if I could stop that, if I could slow it, or if I can help in any way, that's what I want to do. So I guess really what I would like to do and have to a point, but not to the level I want to, is just do these speeches, tour around and either visit schools, visit classrooms, visit factories, whatever it takes, to say to people, it's not the end. Life's actually worth living. Okay, you just need to get through it. And this is how I did it. There's no monopoly on good ideas. So if it can save one life, then that's a valuable day for me. It's not about me knowing everything, because I really don't. But if I can say to people, okay, this is what happened to me and this is how I got through it. And the good thing is, since I wrote the book, I do get a lot of emails from people all over the world saying, until you said it feels like a spiral, I thought I was the only person that felt that way. And that just keeps you going. It said, you're doing the right thing. Because there's an element of, am I being arrogant? Am I just reinventing a career for myself on the back of everybody else's suffering? So there was a lot of hesitation for me, and I still kind of struggle with that now. Like when people say, will you sign the book? I get a little bit embarrassed about it. Be like, why? They're like, because you wrote it. I'm not sure I want to, but I will if that's what somebody wants. But I'm learning. I get to speak to so many other veterans who have survived or who are doing the same as I'm doing now. Hear their story. And that means now I've got more tools in my toolbox to help other people, because I've got additional experiences to draw on and say, okay, this is what a friend of mine did. So I think it's certainly recharged my life and gave me a new mission, if you sort of like that. But I'm still training in military and police because I enjoy it. It's what I'm good at. But I would like that to become a second place instead of becoming priority, and actually trying to stop people hurting themselves become my priority. I'm also not getting any younger, so that might be a good way to slow down for me. But yeah, it was a very difficult book for me to write, because, as I said, it's like a book of my mistakes. But it seems to be doing good.
Yes. Well, you're obviously very humble and you have a extremely important purpose that you're living through. So that's extremely inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing that with us and
My pleasure.
being so open about your experiences and your struggles and just showing that vulnerability is actually a strength is such an incredible example to be showing. So I really appreciate it.
It's my problems came because I hid things. So now what I'm trying to show people is open up. That the more you become a closed book, the more vulnerable you are. Speak to people.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate
Hopefully
it.
you were all inspired by this episode of The Power to Inspire. Thank you for joining us.